Call it the curse of the bitter birds. The Union are sputtering. What the hell? Brian Wright is here. I'm Adrian Fenke. 5-1 loss in Montreal. Oh my goodness. It's not looking good. They're sputtering.
No, it's been a tough couple of weeks here for the Union, as I've been lamenting their forward progress in the previous weeks on our shows here, and it seems like ever since we've started covering them, they've just gone downhill. Last night in Montreal, granted a difficult place to play, but a 5-1 loss is not acceptable, and that matches their worst defeat in team history. So Jim Curtin and the boys will have some work to do in the coming weeks, certainly.
Yeah, so what happened last night? What was the big problem? Because I didn't see the game. What happened?
Well, they've had a tough schedule with U.S. Open Cup games and friendlies against Crystal Palace, and they've had a lot of games in a short amount of time. Wednesday night, they were in New England to face the Revolution in a U.S. Open Cup quarterfinal, which they ended up losing on penalties, which is horseshit. So you have to go from New England and play 3 days later in Montreal, which is a very tough venue, against two stellar guys in former Chelsea star man Didier Drogba and Ignacio Piatti. And whether it's guys being on short rest, some were missing due to suspension, but there was little communication between goalkeeper Andre Blake and the back line all night long. The Drogba and Piatti were just able to carve them up. Drogba scored a hat trick, and amazingly, the Union managed to get one back late on, but they had no answer.
They're now 1-6-3 away from home, 7-1-3 at Talent Energy Stadium. So clearly, they just can't win on the road.
And Curtin said as much in the post-game press conference, as you noted, 7-1-3 at home, which is a stellar mark. Their only road win was the second game of the year in Columbus. And when you looked at the schedule in the beginning of the year, that second game of the season on the road in Columbus was looking like a difficult matchup because Columbus was in the MLS Cup final last year, but Columbus has turned into dog shit this season. So that win perhaps loses a little bit of validity because Columbus is not a good team. But Curtin mentioned in his post-game comments that they've learned how to win at home, but they haven't learned how to win on the road, and that was none more evident than last night.
Yeah, I mean, they've lost to Houston on the road. Houston is the second worst team in the league. But looking at the standings now, the Union are now in third place. They were in first place for a while, for a good chunk of the season. Now sitting in third. The Impact are only a point behind. Toronto FC only 3 points behind. New England 4. So all of a sudden, they could be sitting in sixth place really soon if they don't get their shit together.
You could. You looked at you look at the Eastern Conference standings. Commissioner Garber's getting what he wants a little bit with some parity there. Toronto, with a 4-1 win over DC last night, pulls into within 3 points. New York City put a hurting, or New York Red Bulls put a hurting on New York City this afternoon, 4-1. So now they're 1 point ahead of the Union and 3 behind New York City. The Union, if they lose a couple more games in a row, you could see them drop down to 5th or 6th, which is not what you want. But luckily for Curtin's team, the All-Star game is this week, so they'll get some rest.
Yeah, I mean, even last week they had to come from behind to beat the Red Bulls. They were down 2-0.
They were down 2-0. They didn't beat them. They ended up with a draw. But in that circumstance, when you're down 2-0 at home, to come back and get a 2-2 draw, that's a point that you'll take because they don't usually, in past seasons, if they go down 2-0 at home, that game doesn't end 2-2. That usually ends 4-0 for the other team. Yeah. So that's a good point to get in that circumstance. But I don't want to say the deck was stacked against them, against Montreal here, because they played Montreal tough in their first matchup, which ended up as a 1-1 draw. But things just weren't right there at the back. Keegan Rosenberry, who's an all-star, made the all-star team as a rookie, which is quite a feat. He struggled most of the night. Center backs Josh Yarrow and Richie Marquez really struggled. They were letting Drogba do whatever he wanted, and unfortunately that leaves Andre Blake caught, and he can't do anything. Well, the goals that were scored, it's not a good sight when you get scored on and the first thing you see is the goalkeeper get up and start screaming at his back line as he's picking the ball out of the net. So definitely some communication issues between the goalkeeper and the defense.
Let's talk about Vincent Nogueira. He decides to leave and goes to a mid-level team in France. How much of this little struggle right now, this little stretch, how much of it is his fault?
I don't think it's his fault because when the official word from the union on that transaction was that he left for personal health reasons. We've discussed in previous shows what that is or what it could be. So you can't fault him if he wants to go back home and be closer to his family. However, that has left the union in a horrific spot in the midfield because he was the creator. He was the guy that was able to effectively link passes from the defense, get it up to the forwards, get it up to CJ Sapong to hold up so then you have Pontius and Latu can run off him and create chances. Without Nogueira in there, you're putting Tranquillo Barnetta in his spot in the number 8 there. That's not he's more of a 10. He's more of a central attacking midfield player. So when you're having Barnetta back there, he does a fine job, but it just doesn't. It's like your car that's running on low octane gasoline or the wrong motor oil. It'll still get you where you need to go, but it's not efficient.
Let's talk about Maurice Edu now. Hasn't played all year due to a stress fracture in his leg. So let's discuss when and if he returns, how much is he going to help?
I think he'll help significantly because that number 8 role is his preferred position. So when he comes back, he's been training with the team, training hard, not just jogging. He's been training, so I would say he's probably due to be back sometime in the next couple of weeks, but I don't have any firm sources on that. That's just from things I've read that the team has put out. When he comes back, so he'll go into that number 8 role next to Warren Creval or Brian Carroll, and you'll be able to move Barnetta back to the number 10 so that he can then create more chances closer to goal. And then Edu will also help you defensively because he's that box-to-box player that will get up into the attack and will come back and play defense, and he's very good on set pieces. So him coming back healthy can do nothing but help the team. But at the same time, if you're Ernie Stewart, you still need to be looking in the transfer market to see if you can improve your team because, like you said, they're only a couple of consecutive losses away from dropping out of the playoffs entirely, which is amazing considering they sat in first place for a long stretch.
Yeah, it's funny because, one of the last shows that we did, we're talking about how, maybe they didn't really want to tinker too much into the transfer market because, this team was high up in the standings and maybe you didn't want to, kind of ruin that camaraderie and the chemistry of the team. But it appears that you may have to do something with this team.
If they lose at home to Real Salt Lake, something has to happen, and it's hard to say what that is because there haven't been, from what I've been reading and seeing, and there hasn't been a lot of rumblings about who the union can sign. I've seen one name consistently, and that is Jorge Aparicio, who plays for a Guatemalan team. I think it's Comunicaciones, and he would fit that description of a number 8, a box-to-box guy, young player, 23 years old, plays central defensive midfield. So you could slot him in next to Creval or Carroll in the 4-2-3-1. But there hasn't been anything solid on him. The only things I've seen are that the union are interested and that he's currently training by himself with his current team.
Okay.
So he could be a piece if they can get that done.
Yeah, and you would probably prefer a box-to-box kind of guy too, right? Because, when they've struggled, it's been defensively. It's
been defensively, and early in the year, they weren't giving up goals. That was how they were winning all these games. They weren't giving up goals, and their offense has been very good, which is something we hadn't really been able to say in previous seasons. But, Curtin likes his 4-2-3-1 with their back line, and then you have 2 defensive midfielders. If it's if Edu had been healthy all year, you would have had Vincent Nogueira next to Maurice Edu in those 2 defensive mid spots. That's up there. That's pretty high standing in the league to put those 2 guys next to each other. But with Nogueira gone and Edu not able to play, you're forced to use Brian Carroll, who is 35, 36 years old, The guy has 350 some appearances in MLS. He's good at what he does defensively, but if you can get a younger option, you want to take it. And then they've also been using Warren Creval in that spot next to Carroll, and he's a converted right back. So you have both, at least one of those guys is out of position. So if you could bring in Aparicio, at least you'd have a guy in there who is younger, can run, cover more distance, cover more ground, stop the through balls that are being played against them, stop the crosses. But, yeah, you have two guys in there right now that are struggling.
All right, let's talk about some of the upcoming games that they have, because they have been kind of playing 2 games a week for a little while with the U.S. Open Cup. So after the All-Star break, you have Real Salt Lake next week, Sunday night at Talent Energy Stadium. Real Salt Lake, they are, I believe, 31 points, so they're pretty good in the Western Conference. And then you go away for 2 straight games, 1 game a week again, at DC United, at New England Revolution. They lost in penalty kicks in that U.S. Open Cup. And then another 1 game a week. Saturday, August 20th, you got Toronto FC at Talent Energy Stadium. So 1 game a week for 4 weeks, not 2 games. So, freshen up the legs and let's get after it again after the All-Star break.
Yeah, the All-Star break couldn't have come at a better time. You'll have 2 of the Union guys going to the All-Star game in Andre Blake and Keegan Rosenberry. But after the All-Star break, that Sunday night game against Real Salt Lake is going to be critical, because you need to snap yourself out of this funk. You need to get 3 points. Now, you're just going to, from a team perspective from last night, they're not even going to look at the tape. I think Curtin mentioned in the comments that they're just going to throw that film away and move on, enjoy the All-Star break, and get back into it next week. But they've struggled with RSL. The last time they faced RSL was the beginning of last season, I believe, and they ended up with a 3-3 draw away, which is a decent result. But they have struggled against RSL. I don't think they've ever beaten them. So it's going to be a tough ask there. And then the conference matchups are going to be critical as well, because, like you said, we only have 1 road win. DC's not that good, but they've been making some moves. They acquired Patrick Mullins, I believe, from New York City FC to bolster their forward lines. RFK Stadium, while kind of a dump, is still a tough place to play. New England always gives the Union trouble. For the first, I think, 4 years of the Union existence, they actually hadn't lost to New England, and then that kind of fell by the wayside. So they have a tough, and playing in Foxborough is always difficult because the Patriots refuse to get real grass, and it affects football and soccer.
Yeah, I hate it when they play soccer on that fake turf shit. I hate that.
It actually helped the Union against the Revs in the U.S. Open Cup, because the equalizer that they scored in stoppage time was as a result of a nice bounce off the turf. But generally, it's not a good thing.
That's why I hate it. So, all right. One more thing before we go, because you talked about how the coach wants to take that tape and throw it away. And that's great, because I whenever you see blowouts kind of like that, like in the NFL, NBA, any sport, that's the best way to go. Just put it behind you and just forget about the past and move forward.
I mean, we're not professional athletes, but if I'm on a team that loses 5-1, or if we're on a football team that gets our asses kicked like 43-7 or something, you can't learn anything by watching that film. All you can do is watch. You're going to watch your mistakes for the whole 90 minutes or all 4 quarters. I guess there are small teaching moments in there, but by and large, you're not going to learn anything from that. You're better off that was a really bad game. Let's just move on.
Yeah. All right. Final thoughts before we go?
Final thoughts. Not too much to say about last night's performance, but hopefully they can get some rest over the All-Star break and get back at it at Talent Energy Stadium next Sunday. Their last game at home was against Red Bull, and they had over 18,000 there, and still a nice atmosphere despite the fact that we haven't been too great lately. Still, if you have a chance, get out to a game. It's definitely a fun time.
Yeah, people definitely go to these games. That's for sure. Sean Brace from Philly Influencer has season tickets, and he goes every game, and he says, it's always popping down there. So make sure you get down there. It really is a fun time. For Brian Wright, I'm Adrian Fedke. I guess we'll do a Union show after the game next week, so maybe that would be a Monday show. But we're out. Yeah, we're out, and hopefully you guys enjoyed.
Yeah.